Help support the show by joining the Patreon or becoming a YouTube member. Also, hit that like button and subscribe if you want more Browns-focused content. All right. So every once in a while, especially after big events in the Browns offseason, there's the fun. We got the guy, you can argue about whatever draft pick you like or don't like, but we also need to have an eye on what the financial situation is, right? That's with anything, right? You buy a big purchase in real life, you're going to have fun, drive the car, whatever it is that you bought, live in the house. But then you have to figure out the financial picture, right? Make sure that's a fairly sound plan, preferably before, but obviously you want to talk about it afterwards as well. And to do that, we got one of the best in the business here, Jack Duffin. Jack, the salary cap with the Cleveland Browns, I'm going to ask you an off-the-cuff question here. When do you think people will finally stop obsessing with the salary cap of the Cleveland Browns in the way that they have since the Watson contract? Like, do you think by 2030, people are going to be like, okay, we're not going to talk about the contract anymore? Or do you think we got like at least 3 more years of that?
So I think the first year after Deshaun Watson goes and then people realize, oh, there's actually going to be a dead cap hit, they're still going to freak out. And then the year after, when they're still spending an insane amount of money and first, second, or third in the league, and there might even be a dead cap hit then, that's probably the year where they go, maybe that random guy from London, England does know a little bit about what he's talking about.
But it's a fun time here to talk about the Browns salary cap after the draft. They doubled up at a couple of positions here, right? Whenever you double up in the draft, it's always a bit of an eyebrow raise. Like, okay, you're really adding to that room, especially if it's not like offensive line might be normal to double up because there's so many positions in the offensive line that get kind of grouped together. Same thing with defensive line. But running back and quarterback is an interesting place here to double up. Which position double up raised your eyebrows more, and which one felt more intentional?
To be fair, I loved both of them. So for me, from that sort of the first 2 rounds, I was no fan of those. I love the trade back, but my love for it stopped after that. But then that round 3 onwards was beautiful. I loved every second of it. I'm here for all of it. So I think obviously you raise your eyebrows more with the quarterback because several sort of 2.5's roughly the average for how many teams will carry a quarterback on their 53-man roster. So when some teams are going to carry 2 quarterbacks and we've got 2 rookie quarterbacks, and there's 4 guys that will legit make a roster this year, which that's a great place to be at. We've got 4 quarterbacks that are worthy of being on a 53-man roster. Whereas the running back one just made sense because if the strength of the draft is running backs, let's not mess around. If Dylan Sampson probably goes, 1, maybe 2 rounds higher in a more traditional draft, and the fact that the draft class is so strong, you're getting talent in the 4th. There's no point, hey, people want to take an offensive tackle, let's draft one in the 4th. We don't think they're good enough, but give the people what they want. It's not a vibe you want to go with when you get into day 3.
Let's first focus on the quarterback aspect of it, right? Because it's been interesting hearing people. It's always irritating hearing people outside of Cleveland give their in-depth analysis of the Cleveland situation because it's always like surrounds a misunderstanding of like Deshaun Watson's place on the roster recently. Like I hear people go, they got 5 quarterbacks in that room. Everybody in Cleveland understands there's 4 quarterbacks in that room. One of them's 40, right? So you imagine he's not going to practice that much in camp, given his age. And then you can probably split the reps between the 3. So like when people freak out about the training camp rep stuff, I'm like, that'll figure itself out, right? Now, when it comes to rostering them, is this a year because the Browns don't seem like they're in championship contention where they might not be as strict to their usual templates on these 53 roster cutdowns? And have the Browns demonstrated over the last few years that they're willing to kind of break those templates in order to do things that make sense, at least for the moment? Because they did keep 4 quarterbacks last year, but that was like in a ill-fated effort to go trade like Tyler Huntley or something like that. Like this would be a little bit of a similar situation in that where somebody's probably going to stay on the 53 to get traded.
Yeah, so I always compare the rosters when you get to week one. Just because you can get some weird stuff in that first 53 announcement. So when I look back and talk about the history of positions, and I'd forgot they carried 4 because like all of my data's like they carry 3, and then I'm like, oh no, yeah, they did. So it's why I kind of take that first 53 with a pinch of salt, and it's like, what is it like a week later when we play that first game? So it's one that keen to keep an eye on what happens there. And they did some crazy stuff. 2 tight ends last year was not what you'd expect from the norm, but they did there. They kept 9 on the defensive line, which was a shift for them. But the reason for that was they were just waiting for Hall to get back. Once Hall was back, it rebalanced to 10 on the D line. So it's one that you could get some weird stuff. And who knows? It depends how much they want to push it. Do they want to say, look at the edge room? Do you want to bring in as Darius Smith because you really want to compete and win? And that gives you more pressure because he is better than Alex Wright. Or do you go, look, we want to be good, but we're more interested in seeing have we got a future with a player like Alex Wright, and we want to keep him on the 53. And that could be some interesting decisions as we go along, because we're all out there saying, hey, there's some talent here, there's some talent here in free agency they can bring in. But is it more, let's not go for a Jordan Akins at tight end, let's give maybe Whitehead, someone else, a shot and go, let's see, can they be a future piece for depth in the room?
Yeah. Now, the Browns have gone through what, 4 quarterbacks at least the last 2 seasons? Is that correct? Yeah, Bailey Zapp last year, DTR, Deshaun, Jameis.
5 won games the year before, I think. Or
Yeah,
5 started games.
5 started, I think it was DTR, PJ, Joe Flacco, Deshaun Watson. Who's
Jeff
the 5th?
Driscoll.
Jeff Driscoll. Wow,
My
that is
man.
a trivia. That is a trivia question, right? Like the answer to a trivia question. Who was the 5th guy to start games for the Cleveland Browns that year? But they've started a lot of quarterbacks. I look at this quarterback room, and I don't know if you're on the same vibe with me. I see Joe Flacco, I see Kenny Pickett, and I go, this is a team that's going to play a lot of quarterbacks this year, right? Like you have Dylan Gabriel there, Shador Sanders, you spun 5th round here. First question I want to ask, and we'll get to the second one. Of these 4 quarterbacks, contract-wise, cap-wise, who is the most expendable, and who do you think can most easily be squeezed back onto that practice squad roster?
I don't think any of them get into the practice squad, if I'm honest. So to go to the practice squad, for Joe Flacco is slightly different. You cut Joe Flacco because he's got more than 4 years in the league. So you cut him, and then he can choose to sign on there. He can choose to sign somewhere else. Any of the other players, including Kenny Pickett, you waive them. So any team can then claim them and just keep them at their current contract number. If they go unclaimed, they can sign to your practice squad. They can sign to a different team's 53-man roster. They've got choices. And with any of these 2 young quarterbacks, they're going to get picked up by someone. So the idea, and like, they did it for 1 or 2 years during the COVID. They never actually changed the rule. It was kind of just a side rule to allow practice squad protection, things like that. People kind of misunderstood what that was. You protected them for like 4 days. It wasn't one where they were protected for the whole season. They could still be claimed at the start of the week. It was just so, due to COVID, hey, you can't be stealing a player the 2 days before the game because the other team actually really need them, and call them up. So it's one that I don't think anyone's getting to the practice squad. In all honesty, if any of these guys are cut, you're talking about like $1.5 million dead, somewhere around that, because especially if they then get signed to another 53-man roster. So Kenny Pickett's got like 2.4, but if he then signs the league minimum, that's down to about, what, 1 point and a bit. So money's not going to be the issue here. And some people have really, really tried to push the money narrative. And hey, usually I'm one that I'm saying just follow the money. You're not following the money. No, they're not going to keep Kenny Pickett over Joe Flacco if they think Joe Flacco's better because it's $500,000 difference in something. They're just going to keep the best guy, probably out of the 2 veterans, and the other one's gone. They'll try to trade them first. If not, they'll cut them. And look, there's weird routes. If Sanders bombs out, they cut him. Do they keep 4? 4 would not be insane. And they go, hey, maybe these two rookies aren't ready to be the backup week one, and they go, look, we'll keep it until the bye, and then after the bye, when they're ready to promote one, they could just trade Kenny Pickett then. They could trade Joe Flacco then. So it's one that it wouldn't be unheard of to do that. And quite frankly, if you're talking about Tony Brown as the sixth cornerback or keeping Kenny Pickett for 4 more weeks, you can probably just put Tony Brown on the practice squad and call him up. They did it last year. I don't think anyone's going to cry a river over Tony Brown going on the practice squad.
Yeah, you did draft the running back in a line, well, 2 running backs and a linebacker this year too. So like those are special team spots too, right? That they could fill up as rookies. So like I think there's going to be some added versatility to having those guys there as far as like getting down to 53, because usually it's like, oh, you got to keep the 6th line. Like we've kept Winston Reed, and like he played well when he got in there, but we've kept him for like 3 years now, and it's like because we need somebody to play special teams. But now it's a little bit different there, especially with Carson having a lot of special teams, a lot more for somebody who would be drafted at his position there. So the quarterback situation, the running back situation, I think there's been a lot of talk about that Jerome Ford pay cut. What's fact and fiction from like how that's been reported? Because the way like I've heard it is, oh, Jerome Ford took the pay cut. That means Nick Chubb go bye-bye. Right, that's basically been the reporting there. So, from your perspective, somebody who's a bit more informed, what did you see when you saw some of the details out on the Jerome Ford contract renegotiation?
Yeah, so just to kind of explain how we got to this point. So there's something called the proven performance escalator. And what that does is when a player plays a certain amount of snaps, doesn't matter how well they play in those snaps, but when they play a certain amount of snaps over the first 3 years, they then get a pay bump in year 4. And what that did to Jerome Ford is took him from about 1.4 million to 3.4 million. And that goes from, hey, that's just a cheap guy that you're not even thinking twice. 1.4 million, no guarantees. You're happy with that. And then suddenly it becomes 3.4 million. And you're like, if you're not a starter, high level backup, maybe you're happy with that. And it's like, if you're anything below that, you might still keep that guy, but you're also looking at everything out there on the market and going, is he worth 3.4 million versus, hey, could potentially get a J.K. Dobbins or a Nick Chubb for less than 3.4 million. So it's one that question is immediately going to get asked within the building. So that causes issues. And we go back, Harrison Bryant, Jordan Elliott both had the same scenario. And what they did is they took a pay cut, some incentives on there to get back near to the number they had, but you have no guarantees on that 3.4 million. So Jerome Ford was sat there and his agents probably ringing the Browns. That discussion probably happened really early and going, look, guys, I want to know, is my player here? Is it one that you're just going to keep until the end of camp and then cut them? What's the vibe on your side? So it's one where it's in Jerome Ford's best interest not to wait until one day before cut down to 53 and he goes told, hey, you're getting released, because you might only sign for the league minimum there because whoever was going to pick you up, you're not really in a position of strength. Whereas they went, we'll guarantee 1.75 million of it, but you need to forget about earning all the way up to 3.4. That shows that, because some people are like, oh, well, you're definitely going to keep him. It's like, you're not keeping him at that number. The same way if Myles Garrett was earning 100 million a year, I'd be like, we need to get Myles Garrett off this team. It's not about the play. It's about your play matching what you're getting paid. So it's one that he's now guaranteed a roster spot. The question is that spot with the Browns or someone else? And what was different between, you look at Harrison Bryant, you look at Jordan Elliott, they both got signing bonus in their money, which meant the difference between signing bonus and base salary, you can trade that guaranteed base salary to another team. You cannot trade the signing bonus amount. So it's one that if we were talking about, it's the minimum salary, mate, it's just for easy numbers, say it was 750 grand base salary fully guaranteed and $1 million signing bonus, you're saying you're not trading this guy. He's definitely here, because you wouldn't give them $1 million and then trade them unless something miraculous happened. Maybe a UDFA broke out that you didn't want to lose. But the fact that he just got guaranteed base salary makes it incredibly tradable as well, because another team will probably go, yeah, we'll take him, especially if they're going to got 112 running backs roughly. If you work on the basis 3.5 a roster per team, 112 across the league. What, about 5, 6, 7 of them are going to get injured between now and week 1. So you're easily going to be able to move that deal onto another team. So he's solidified his spot on a team, whether that's the Browns or someone else. That's to be seen. And people are trying to rush to a decision now. The Browns can sign Nick Chubb, they could sign J.K. Dobbins, and they don't have to decide now. They can leave this open. Teams on average carry 3.5 running backs, so they could go to 4, they could go to 3, but they don't need to make that decision until just before week 1. So you're better having 4 guys potentially that are worthy of a roster spot and then decide down the line, because who knows? If someone gets injured and they're going to miss half the season or the full season, don't have 3 guys and you're stuck then with 2 and you're scraping the barrel trying to go, what running back got cut and we're going to throw them into the lineup, or you over promoting Pierre Strong, because we've seen enough of that pass blocking.
So this was more like, and if we were to put this like in kind of the idea of commerce, where someone's like, I am not going to be able to sell a 2015 iPad at the MSRP that Apple has suggested, which is like $300, right? So let me put this at 129 so it can move because I want it off the shelf, right? Like that's the football agent equivalent of like, okay, we got a lot of young guys coming in this draft, best running back class in a long time. A lot of teams are taking 2 running backs. I got to make sure Jerome Ford is appealing to roster for all 32 teams. So, hey, understand you're going to have to take a bit of a price cut. You can't get that 3.2 million because you're not very attractive to roster at 3.2. But if we reduce that number, then it becomes more of a value. Then it becomes more of a thing where you can sell him to teams a lot easier. And if you're the Browns and you don't want to keep him, that also benefits you because it's like, hey, we can move him a lot. We might be able to get something back, even if it's minimal. You might be able to get something back in return, or maybe you get an exchange going where it's like, oh, you don't like this guy. You know, they've done that before, right? Where like, you don't like this guy. I like this guy. Let's swap them. Okay, cool. The contracts are low enough to where it's not going to be a burden for anybody to take on, or you're not going to expect me to have to throw an asset or something just so you can take the Jerome Ford deal. Is that kind of what the thinking is with this?
Yeah, 100%. And it could get to the end of camp and it's we're sending Jerome Ford and a 5th for Michael Mayer and a 7th. That could be one. Or it could just be one where we go, look, we'll give you a 6th, you give us a 7th and other way around. We'll give you Jerome Ford and a 7th and you give us a 6th, because we're just trying to move that money onto another team. We're not looking to get much value, but people have said, oh, well, if they add Chubb, then are you just instantly turning around and cutting Jerome Ford? And it's like, whoa. We're not trying to trade Jerome Ford straight away. Yeah. Have more options. And kind of the blueprint for Andrew Berry, and you look at it, every position room last year, bar running back, if the plan was to roster 5 guys, they had 6. If their plan was to roster 3 guys, they had 4. And it was one where they put themselves in that spot where you're okay. Not last year, the year before. And running back was the one exception. Nick Chubb then got injured straight at the start of the season. It was like, we really needed one more here, because it was just Nick Chubb and Jerome Ford then. And coming off his rookie year, he hadn't shown much. He definitely had a better year in 2024, Jerome Ford. And it's one that there's a good chance Jerome Ford is the running back. But the idea that this change of contract shuts the door on Nick Chubb or guarantees him a roster spot in Cleveland, it's like, no. If it had been $1 million signing bonus in there, different story. And it's why don't just look at, oh, it's guaranteed, it means this. You see it with the UDFAs. If someone as a draft pick gets a $700,000 guarantee, that's a signing bonus they're getting. If someone gets a $250,000 guarantee as a UDFA, there might be a tiny bit of signing bonus, but it's guaranteed base salary, which effectively just guarantees them a spot on the practice squad at Cleveland or somewhere else. Or if they're not on a practice squad, they're just getting paid for one. So It's one that the 2 types of guarantees do make an impact.
Definitely. See, that's why we need to bring Jack on, because there's a lot you can get a lot of misinformation with the misunderstanding of what this means and what that is and what they're actually trying to do. I've heard some people like, oh, he's taking a pay cut so we can get more guys. I'm like, that's not at all what's happening here. Like, I highly doubt that's what's going on here. And just for reference, for those watching this video, we recorded this Sunday, May 4th. If something happens after that, understand this was before that happened. So don't leave me 30,000 comments down below telling me that, oh, this happened, Quincy. And we recorded this a little early just to try to get ahead of things. But that's such an interesting thing with the Jerome Ford contract. And it's like, oftentimes with contracts and with things, the information comes out in like different packets, right? Where it's like, oh, you get the big number. And then people run with that, right? And they run with the early information first. Then you get later information that puts context on it. But by the time that, it's like the old saying, misinformation gets to go around the world and truth don't even get to put his pants on, right? Like it's like you're just sitting there like, oh, wow. The Jerry Jeudy contract was like that last year. So, with these contract things, I've noticed that it's like the smaller details that really do make a huge difference in how these contracts are perceived and how fan bases should react to these contracts. Do you see anything else coming up? Because I feel like they're pretty set with most of what they want to do here. Do you see anything coming up as far as like things they might want to get done during the season with these players? I know Martin Emerson, is he in this last year of his rookie deal? Is this coming up here?
Yeah, so there was 3 players that got the proven performance escalator for the Browns this year. You've got obviously Jerome Ford, Alex Wright, who you mentioned on your show, and cheers for the shout out when you were discussing him. And then Martin Emerson was the other one. So they're the 3 that got a pay rise. Martin Emerson just feel like he's making the team. And it's one that you don't need to rush into deals. I think David Njoku's the one on the roster that hit that June, July time, late June, in July, where it wouldn't shock me to see an extension done. I think you're looking around the similar number. So was he on 15.25 now? Call it 15.5, 15.75. And they tie him in for another 3-4 years. Probably 3 years, give him 2 guaranteed. I could certainly see that getting done because at the end of that, he's in that awkward spot of like, he's around the sort of 8th best tight end in the league, which it's hard to find that. It's not one like, hey, I can just find acceptable player at defensive tackle. The drop-off's so significant from that top sort of group. So it just makes sense to keep him around because at 15.5, it's not stupidly expensive either. It's not saying, hey, it's a $40 million edge, and he's like, oh, you're the 10th best edge, but we're going to pay you like Myles Garrett. It's a different price bucket you're playing in.
Yeah, that's always an interesting thing that happens with like the non-quarterback contracts, because I'm like, for a few guys, like making the most money for a non-quarterback's not really going to be that big of a deal for your football team because they're really good, right? Jamar Chase, Myles Garrett. But it's when Trey Henderson gets Myles Garrett money is when it starts to be like, oh, we're just resetting the market, right? I think the same thing happened with wide receivers. Like, oh yeah, Justin Jefferson, that makes sense, right? But then, that trickles down to like Calvin Ridley getting like 25 or something like that. Or maybe like a guy who's a fringe one, really good receiver, really good player, but can make the argument that he should get the money, gets the money, and now you're paying, like the 8th best receiver in football, $35 million. And it's like, there's no way. There's 8 guys that good worth that much money. So yeah, that's something to look out for too, because David is in that interesting tier where you want to keep him, but it could be tight end isn't that big of a money making position. So I guess you're spared by that. But if he were like a wide receiver in that same range, it'd be like, oh, you want to keep him, but the market's going to be way too expensive on him, right? Like, and it's like you got to figure out what you want to balance there with him.
And one of his biggest strengths is if you look at that bucket of like the top pass catchers, he's just a bit down on that. But when you start looking at like the top 18, top 16, let's say top half pass catchers, he's basically the best blocker in that group. And it's one, look, his blocking's not incredible, but his blocking is really good. And that's one that's a benefit that you've got to price in there, because some of these tight ends, they're just big slot receivers. They're not really offering you much other than a questionable chip at times. So he brings value in that aspect.
He can be in line, right? And that also makes you think, okay, even if some of the athletic gifts start to dip off a little bit, you still have his physicality to lean on. Um, so a lot of interesting stuff here with Jack Duffin. I think we talked about some of the smaller stuff with the contracts. We went through quarterback, right? We went through running back. Is there anywhere else on this roster that you want to touch on, or you think is kind of interesting as far as like where the cap is and how the Browns are going to manage it from a not an X's and O's standpoint, but more of a spreadsheet standpoint?
Um, Over the next few years, DT will be interesting because they've made some significant investments there in draft picks. And it's one where at the minute Hall and Mason Graham, they're cheap. But that's going to be down the line where I always say look at the first 2 rounds of the draft because they're the positions where you're probably going to give that big extension to, and that's going to become the core part of your roster. And it's interesting that we've looked over 2 years and we're talking about a couple of DTs, a linebacker, a running back, which you wouldn't naturally expect. The DTs are fine because if you want to find elite, you do have to go in those first 2 rounds. But linebacker and running back was definitely a surprise. And that's one to see as this moves on. Obviously, if Jimmy keeps throwing money, it makes less of an impact. If you're a low spender and you're spending big at 2 DTs, a running back, and 2 linebackers, I'm like, this is suboptimal because you'd be cutting from your wide receiver or some other budget. But Jimmy's extra like 50, 60 million a year makes everything a lot less stressful. I guess touch on Watson. Watson's always one where people are asking what's going to happen. He's not going to be around for the 2025 season. I think everyone other than his biggest homers have accepted that. I genuinely believe he's probably going to be on the 53-man roster in 2026. So he's still due 46 million this year. That year. They're going to restructure it, and they could just cut him, and then they're dealing with a number of about 89 million in that year, and that's just suboptimal. So what I expect them to do is to keep him on the roster for 1 more year, post June 1st, cut him, and then split that over 2 more years. So there's still dead cap in 2027, 2028, but they know that's coming now, and they've known that's coming since last year. So they can prepare for it. By spreading it out over so many years, they can keep spending this league record money that Jimmy Haslam keeps throwing in because the cash will be off the books. So they're spending the cash and they're just backloading it. So I see a world where maybe they do carry the 4th quarterback in 2026 and they go, hey, we've got Dylan Gabriel, we've got Shedeur Sanders. Maybe they're happy with them and Deshaun Watson's the 3rd game day inactive. Or it's one where maybe they draft a guy in the 1st round and Deshaun Watson's a 4th quarterback there and they go, look, effectively, we're managing this roster with 52 players rather than 53. This dude's just here to wander around the facility and make friends with people. And they've got those 2 options. But if people are looking at what's going to happen in 2026, I'd work on the basis that he's around. And people are like, oh, will he be a problem? If you've got 46 million guaranteed, and if you do anything detrimental to the team, it can get taken away from you. You are heavily incentivized not to be an idiot. So the idea that people think he's going to be an idiot is just deluded.
Well, no, it reminds me of like, okay, he had the setback with the Achilles, and then people were speculating on like how he did it. And then like the next week he's doing his rehab in Berea. And part of me's like, yeah, I know what that's about. I know exactly what that's about. That is protecting the bag. That is like, all right, let me do this here so you can't say I was doing something I wasn't supposed to be doing. Right? Like that is 100% what that's about there. And like if you're Deshaun, right, you want to prove that you can, at least in a locker room perspective, right? He's always going to be a press distraction. You're like, he's always going to have questions there. But you want to prove to all 32 teams if you're Deshaun Watson, if you want to keep your NFL career alive by any stretch, that you can be a team player. So like if I were Deshaun, I would take that opportunity being like, let's say the Browns do just fully effectively use this rookie quarterback buffer they got right now. Where it's like, okay, Dylan is the backup. Shador starts in 2026. And then we got a guy that we drafted in the first round early that we're going to let develop and pretty much sacrifice these two if we aren't fully convinced they're dudes. While we also make it clear Deshaun's not playing. He's going to be inactive on game day. But if you're Deshaun, that's an opportunity for you to, do the sideline guy stuff that everybody loves, right? I'll get the iPad and teach the young guys and show them all of your experience and stuff. And I think that would have to be how he looks at it, because it's like, hey, you're not going to get rostered based on your ability to play football anymore. You got to prove that there's something else of value that you bring to the table. So I think Deshaun, if they are, and this is the thing with them, right? Sometimes they're not very realistic or have a good view of what things actually are with them anymore. I think they would be heavily motivated to understand that's the situation for them. But let's talk about one scenario before we leave. Right now, we're pretty much assuming, I think it's a fair assumption, we're going to see whatever we get at quarterback this year. But, we got the extra first-round pick. Andrew Berry loves to talk about how these first-round picks are resources, right? Sometimes you use that resource to take a player. Sometimes you use that resource to bundle up to get a bigger resource. Sometimes you use that resource in part of a trade, right? And we're all assuming that that's going to go towards quarterback because that makes a ton of sense. It makes a lot of sense why you would move back, right? But let's say we get the surprise, and I'm not going to say a name here because then people are going to start arguing in the comments. Let's say one of these quarterbacks, right? Whether it be Kenny Pickett, Dylan Gabriel, Shador, one of these guys, right, that are under 30 demonstrates that they can actually give you a suitable starting to franchise level tier 3 quarterback level of play at the very least. And you're like, oh, I think Kenny's a little bit different because you would have to pay him immediately. So let's say it's one of the rookies, right? just for contract's sake, right? One of these guys making $800K this year. One of the rookies. They come out and you're like, oh, we can run with this. We can win 11, 12 games and our defense might be able to make up for a lot of the holes that we have here. And maybe we need to add more on the offensive side of the ball. Let's say you get in that situation, you hit the lottery, 777, you hit on one of these quarterbacks. We're through the moon, right? We finally get our quarterback in Cleveland. How could they take advantage next year of that quarterback being on that rookie deal, right? Because you only get 4 of these years when you draft the guy outside the first round. How could they take advantage of that next year, given what their cap situation could or could not look like while still dealing with, getting Deshaun off the books?
Yeah. So I'd say the best thing you can do, and some people won't like this, is trade down with that first one. And the reason for that is you're probably not going to see enough in a year to know that he's 100% the guy. And who knows? It could be the great scenario that both of them are still showing real promise this year. And you're like, hey, we've got a 60% chance one of these two guys is the guy. And what you do is you trade down from the first one, because then you set yourself up with 2 first-round picks again in 2027. Because if it does turn out that they don't turn out to be the guy, don't give up on that and use these 2 potentially high picks, 2 top 10 picks, and go, oh, we're just going to add a tackle and a wide receiver and go for it. You're better going, let's drop down a little bit. It might only be 4 or 5 picks, but you add that extra first next year, because that keeps putting you in this position that you've got 2 first-round picks every year. And I wrote a recent article that said the best way you can just build a roster long-term is keep having 3 picks in the first 2 rounds. And those are your money rounds. If you look at where the majority of starters come from in the league and where the hit rate is, it's those first 2 rounds. Once you get it below that, you're talking about situational players. And yeah, a third edge can still be really valuable, and they're playing maybe 50% of snaps, but it's a different level than sort of your top wide receivers and your top talent. So keep adding the extra picks. But yeah, as you said, you can throw money at free agency. You can go out and trade aggressively for guys, but trading down is going to be really, really important just to keep as many options on the table. But all signs at this stage are pointing to a loaded offensive tackle class, and it's one that my only mock draft did not have them taking a single offensive lineman, and it wasn't a surprise for me, because I thought if Josh Connolly's gone before you get to 33, I'm not taking one for the sake of it. So I did not see them going for one, and that's the way they went. But next year, they'll probably take 2 in the draft. And the reason for that is that's the strength of the draft, so lean into it.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting too because look, I'm usually not trade back guy. I'm not a big fan of trading back, especially like in the top 5. This year was a little different because at least they traded back, stayed in the top 5, right? But it's going to be interesting to see what happens here at quarterback because usually if you feel like 26 is going to be a good quarterback class, you don't want to be taken out of it. I don't think that would be the worst thing next year. I think that class is going to be strong, much stronger than this year's class at quarterback. But let's say you do, get to extend the wait without like dragging the fan base out or killing the team with Shador or Dylan Gabriel. And then you fall into that 27 class. That 27 class is looking to be the superior class, right? I don't think Arch is coming out next year. Manning family kid, those guys stay in college for like 3-4 years. He's probably going to stay in college until 27, right? Then you have DJ Lagway, who I think is going to be really good playing right now. There's Darian Henley that's playing right now. There's a lot of guys that could be in that class there. Lenore Sellers could be in 26, would definitely be in 27, right? Dylan Raiola, who I know people they hate on him because of the meme stuff, but I'm like, you watch the kid play football, he can throw it, right? So there's a lot of flexibility with these next 2 classes because we're not sure about 26. We are sure about 27 is going to be really good because you're talking about at least Jeremiah Smith's in that class, right? Like there are some guys that are going to be really good. So if you get a quarterback who, let's say, can get you through that year without being desperate at the position, I think that puts you in a position of strength. And I think the important thing for the Browns is they got to get this year. What I think their goal is they don't want to be desperate next offseason like they're desperate right now for a quarterback, right? They have to be in a position where they can make a decision at quarterback based on the prospect and not the need. And I think that's what this year is all about. If they get out this season, regardless of what the record is, and they don't feel desperate about quarterback, that's a huge win for this team because all of a sudden finding the next guy is a lot easier when you're desperate, right? It's a lot easier to find lobster and steak dinners when you're not starving, right? So you got to get yourself out that position of starving. I think that's what they're hoping for. It's like, hey, hopefully one of these guys is good enough so we're not starving for a quarterback next year. So we make the right decision. We don't just bet the farm on the guy we kind of like.
And it's why I'm really keen to see when the schedule comes out, purely for when the bye week's going to be. Will it be because they have the option with the London game? Rumor was the 5th of October. Who knows if that actually comes to
fruition? Yes.
That's the one. Because you can choose to have it the week after, but it's optional. It's not one that is enforced. And it's one that potentially at that point, unless the season's going really well, that might be where they go, look, one of these rookies has shown enough. Let's see what they've got. Because you don't want to just be going in and you go, hey, let's give them the last 3 weeks once we're officially eliminated. And it's like, oh, they actually look good. We've left this too late that we can go, let's give them another year. Because if you see 6 to 8 games and you're like, they've looked really good, then you're like, we can lean into this for a year. And who knows, it could easily be one because they've got 2 first-round picks. They might end up with 1 and 10. They might take the quarterback at 1, trade back at 10 to say go to 20, and then they've got 2 first-round picks the following year. And you're sat there again going, you said that 27 class looks good. If they give that potentially first overall pick the whole season, you've got Dylan Gabriel and Shador Sanders behind them. That's your 3 quarterback room with Deshaun Watson holding a clipboard, looking damn fine doing it, setting himself up for the Atlanta Falcons in 2027 as a free agent. That's my prediction there.
If Atlanta does it, they would make sense.
So it's one that they could then, despite taking a quarterback first overall, a year later go, look, he's not worked out. We're going to go take another one. Because if you've traded back with that second one and gone from like 10 to 20, you've added that first round pick the next year. So you're setting yourself up that you're not losing assets. And quite often the sake of moving 10 to 20, you're leaning into does the quarterback work? And if not, we've got the backup plan. Keep preparing yourself every year. And if you keep having 2 first-round picks and you trade down with one of them, that if you don't need the quarterback at that pick, give yourself as many outs as you can. And that's why I really like what they've done this offseason. They did not have an answer at quarterback. And look, if they'd have got Russell Wilson, I'd have been really, really happy. But now, in a way, I'm happy they haven't got Russell Wilson. Because if you got Russell Wilson, you're probably making the playoffs. And yeah, you're not going to have success once you get to the playoffs. But then we're not getting to see, is Dylan Gabriel good? Is Shedeur Sanders good? Because you wouldn't be able to find that out this year. And then kind of you're forcing that quarterback pick next year. So the poor veteran quarterback options, and Kenny Pickett's not that bad, but he's not great. They're better having bad bridges where these guys can realistically, it wouldn't shock me if Shedeur Sanders and Dylan Gabriel, one of them starts week 1. I don't think they'll do it. I think they'll get at least 4 weeks of a veteran, but I wouldn't be shocked.
Yeah, it's one of those quarterback rooms where when I hear people go, well, where are the reps going to be for the young guys? I'm like, there's going to be reps, y'all. Like, I've watched enough Cleveland Brown football. I've seen enough. I've seen enough quarterbacks rooms like this where I'm like, there are going to be reps. I promise you. There will be reps to be given around, right? Like, there will be reps for grabs, especially because Kenny Pickett, very familiar with this kind of offense. Same thing with Joe Flacco. So, like, yeah, you want to give them some reps, obviously, to get familiar with their guys offensively and everything else. But it's not like you're installing a new offense like you were last year and you had to give Deshaun Watson like every single rep you could, and then it still didn't even make any difference, right? So
don't rule out a shock Kenny Pickett trade before we get to training camp. That's
really
one of my bold predictions to keep an eye on, because they might look at this and go, we want to really lean into these 2 rookies. Joe Flacco will come and bring a couch and we'll set that on the side of the training field. You've got the clipboard, your job to watch them, teach them through what they should be looking at. And we don't want to give snaps to Kenny Pickett. We just want to go all in on these 2 guys. So that could be one where they go for the wild card and they flip Kenny Pickett early.
You think that would happen?
I could see it.
That could happen in your scenario. Would that be like after OTAs, after they get him on the field on 7-7s for a little bit? That would make sense, because like you don't need to give Joe Flacco reps to understand what his bar is for this offense. And I'm sure Joe Flacco's fine with not taking those reps. Like, or maybe he's not, but he's going to have to find his piece, right? He's at that place of his career where it's like, okay, it's not about what you want anymore. But
tell him he's the star. He's the star, but we're just going to get these guys ready. And what we're going to do is we'll give you the first 2 drives in each preseason game. And then these guys can have the rest of it split between.
And you can say to yourself too, well, we know where Joe Flacco's at. So, you know, unless I'm watching one of these guys, I'm like, they're definitely better than Joe Flacco. Then, okay, then you play one of them, right? Because now they're undeniable. It's like, okay, you got to start them. But if you're watching these guys, you're like, yeah, they might be better than Joe. All right, just play Joe, right? Give them more time. So yeah, I think that could make a ton of sense there too. I just worry about if anybody would buy Kenny Pickett at that point. But it might just be for like a minimal type deal situation. And you know, Andrew's pretty good at the trade stuff outside of the Watson thing, which we kind of now understand to be outside of his control. He has found way to get value out of things. And look, you know, as much as I did not love the idea of trading back from 2, right? I think when you have these elite picks, you should use these elite picks. But I do think that you got a lot back for that slide back from 2 to 5, right? So Andrew's pretty good at that. But Jack, thank you for joining us. You can catch more of Jack on the OBR. I have the OBR shirt on. Make sure you check out him. He writes really good stuff for the public and also for the subscribers on the OBR. Make sure you go check him out there. Jack, what have you been cooking up recently for people to get excited about?
So I'm into my weekly rolling schedule where I just deep dive on a position every week, loads of different stuff. So start with quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends. But yeah, hit it all over at the OBR. At basically 3 a.m. every day, 7 days a week, there's usually an article on the OBR about something I've written.
All right. Make sure you guys go check it out. Jack, thank you for coming on. Everybody else have a great day. Have a better night. Peace.